Okay, so our next guest is the author of the American Daughters, the American Daughters book, and this is the one that we were talking about as well. And so his name is Maurice Carlos Ruffin, and the books are completely different stories, totally different. Um, but I just thought it was just really coincidental that they were on the same night. So, Maurice, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV.
Good evening, ladies. How you doing?
Doing
Wonderful. How are
great.
you tonight?
Thank you so much for having me. I was so sorry to miss the earlier date, but I'm very happy to be here tonight with you and also Piper earlier.
Right. It was just the way it turned out. You all ended up because of the reschedule, you all ended up on the same night. And that was really just serendipity. So I have a copy of your book, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet because as the people who watch the show know, my to be read shelf is massive. But both books are on my list of future reads in the next month to 2 months. So congratulations on the book making the rounds. And
Thank you.
the setting is historical as well. So why don't you tell us what the book is about in terms of the overall plot without
Oh,
giving away
sure.
spoilers.
My pleasure. Well, first of all, I want to say make sure that everybody out there gets a copy of Piper's book. You need to buy a copy of it and buy a copy for your friends as well and your family. She's really cool. It's my first time hearing her talk on your program. So, yeah, support
Okay.
Piper.
Okay. Well, thank you. Because we all have to spread the love and support each other because the iron
Yeah.
sharpens iron, as they say. So,
That's
um,
right.
thank you for that.
Yeah, we're one community. So
Yeah.
my book is The American Daughters, as you already said.
Mhm.
It's pretty straightforward. The book is set in New Orleans in the 1840s and 50s. And the main character who's pictured here on the cover, when she's a girl, she and her mother, Sidney, are brought to the city from the country. They had been at one of those, plantations. And Addie discovers that there is a secret society of Black women and girls in New Orleans who have come together to sabotage and undermine the Confederates. And so they're doing all kind of dirty tricks to basically just disable the Confederates. And so this is really a book about Black women in community coming together to support each other. There's a lot of humor, there's a lot of love in it. And to me, it's a very positive story.
Wow.
Okay.
Sound like I say a lot when I hear about these types of stories. It's a lot of layers. And as I'm listening to you tell us about the story, I can just imagine the amount of research that it took to just bring this story together.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely, doctor. Really, 20 years of research. I'm not exaggerating. So I'm a former corporate lawyer. I'm still a lawyer, but I don't practice anymore. And during my lunch breaks in New Orleans, I'd often leave my office and go down to the French Quarter where they had these archives. And so, literally 20 years ago, 2004, I was in an archive and I found some documents that talked about how the Confederates during the Civil War, they didn't really fight like Confederates in other locations. And I kept wondering, why would they not fight harder? Not that I want them to fight and win, but then when I thought about it over a long period of time and doing other research about Black women and resistance movements, I realized, oh, I know what happened. Like, if my great great grandmother times eight, was around that time, I know what her personality would be like. She would be doing things behind the scene to support her family and protect them. And so I also learned that, for example, during that time, poisoning was really popular. Apparently, it's the most popular way to kill somebody. Um, and so it kind of came together. Then I read documents, about Sojourner Truth, about Harriet Tubman, about other women in resistance movements. The mother in my book, Sunit, is named after a resistance fighter in Haiti during the revolution over there. And so it kind of all came together. And then also stories from my own ancestors that my grandmother and my mother told me over the years. I kind of mixed it all together to make this story.
Oh, okay.
So you're
Wow.
actually from New Orleans?
I am. I'm 100% New Orleans, yes.
Me
Oh,
too.
I'm just from New Orleans. Y'all might be kin.
Right.
Probably. Probably.
Wait, hold on. What ward are you from?
I'm from New Orleans East.
Okay, so you're from the Ninth Ward.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yes.
From the Ninth
Yes.
Ward too.
Yeah, not the lower 9, but just the general 9.
No, I'm from the lower 9.
My grandma's house was out there.
Okay, see, I'm telling you, we talk long enough. We're gonna know the same people. Watch.
For sure.
Yeah, well, I'm not from New Orleans.
That's all right.
In fact, I've only visited New Orleans a couple of times. Because normally when we go east, we end up bypassing New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
From Houston, when we go from Texas, if I do the southern route, we go through Slidell, so we don't have to go through New Orleans.
Oh, you skip right past.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I rarely have like gone into the city, only a couple of times.
You got to come down and get some of this gumbo, get some
I
jambalaya.
know. Well, half Louisiana is in Houston, in Texas. It's in Houston
That's true.
especially. So we got lots of Cajun food and gumbo. People who make authentic gumbo. We got a lot. We got a lot
That's
of
true.
that.
That is true.
So the food is here.
Well, while
New
we're talking
Orleans
about
food.
New Orleans, Piper told us that there's a plaque somewhere in New Orleans that commemorates you writing one of your books in their coffee shop.
Yes, it is. It's true story. It's a little embarrassing, but I accept it. Yeah, they put that up a few years ago. The coffee shop is called the Orange Couch.
The
And
Orange Couch. Okay,
the
I'm going to
Orange
be in
Couch.
New Orleans this weekend, so I'm going to go find the Orange Couch because I've never been there.
Yeah, it's a very nice place, very clean. It's a nice cafe. And Piper mentioned we have a friend in common, Farrah Rochon, who's a novelist also. And so, she's a fantastic writer. They both are obviously. And the book that I wrote at the Orange Couch was my first novel. It's called We Cast a Shadow. I wrote this. It came out about 5 years ago now. And so I would always go there after work on weekends and just be sitting at the same table over and over again. And the owner, his name was Fred. I guess he was like, well, we should put a little marker that you had been here all these years.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That is really neat. What an honor.
Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm. So for your book, The American Daughters, how much of the spy subplot is accurate historically, or did you embellish that for storytelling purposes?
Well, it's two things. We know, for example, that Black women were involved in spying, and for a long time that those facts were denied. So to give a perfect example, anybody who's gone to school, like even middle school, high school in the past 50 years, knew about Harriet Tubman being this person who was working with the Underground Railroad to free enslaved people. But then come to find out that she actually got a pension from the U.S. military because she worked on their behalf as a spy, and she was actually part of the Army back in the old days. And so, that was not widely known until, I guess, relatively recently. And so I sort of took that fact, in fact, of other movements around the country, and I took this idea from a woman named Sadia Hartman. She is a historian. She's won a Genius Grant, it's like $1 million. So she's like a big, big deal. But she won this big prize for this idea that she has called critical fabulation. Long story short, critical fabulation says it's okay to sort of infer some facts, even if you don't have it based on what you do know. So, people will sometimes say that George Washington chopped down a cherry tree. He never did that, right? But it tells you how the nation wants us to feel about that man. If he looks good, we all look good. So the way I see it, knowing what I know about, actual Black women and girls in the past, about resistance movements, my family, y'all family, that kind of thing, I can infer that they weren't all just like, cowering in a corner somewhere, that they were actually making plans, taking actions, and again, being in community and working together to make their lives better, make a better future for all of us.
Well, that's certainly true. We have had to be, out of necessity, extremely creative.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And also spiritual. We've had a lot of faith. If without the faith of Black women, and I'm not saying men didn't have faith, I'm just saying a Black woman's faith is different. Maybe because we're mothers, but without that, I'm not sure we'd be here today. I mean,
oh, look, I know I
three
wouldn't
of us
be.
sitting here.
Look, without the love of Black women, I don't think there would be anything to even talk about, and there are, communities in history that don't exist anymore, because for whatever reason, they were just being too oppressed. And I really feel like with the ingenuity and brilliance of Black women and girls throughout history, that's why I'm here. I know that for certain. And even though my grandmother, who was an activist, and my mother, who, doesn't suffer fools lightly, that support is a beautiful thing. And I really appreciate it. That's why I wrote this book.
Yeah. Now, you're a lawyer, but are you a journalist as well? Have you done any?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes.
Yeah, a little bit. Sometimes I get asked to write pieces. I mean, I've written for the New York Times and I've written for the LA Times, and other publications. Often it's more, I mean, how would you even describe it? Like sometimes I'll be asked to interview people. Like, for example, a year ago, I interviewed Big Frida for a magazine. Um, Sometimes I'll be asked to sort of give perspective on something that's happened. So a few years ago, I think it was 2017, there was a hurricane in Houston, and they asked me to sort of report on it and offer an opinion piece about it because of my experience in New Orleans with Katrina. So I do those kind of things. Yeah.
Interesting, because I live in Houston, so I know the hurricane you're referring to. So, because we don't have them a lot,
Yeah.
but we do have them. They come through. That might have been Ike.
I think so.
Uh,
I think so.
yeah, and we were fortunate, uh, as far as where we live. We're on higher ground, so we didn't have the flooding. Um, and we're also where our house is, we're near a water treatment plant. So when they turn the power back on, those areas are where they get turned on first. So we were only out of power for maybe a day and a half. Some people didn't have power for 2, 3 weeks.
Wow. You picked the right spot there.
Yeah, the schools were closed. A lot of them were closed for 2 or 3 weeks because
Mhm.
the schools didn't have power.
Right.
Yeah.
And
One amazing thing that came out of that hurricane in Houston was the amount of people from New Orleans who pitched in to help.
Mhm.
There were churches in New Orleans sending busloads of people to Houston to help recovery, and many people were collecting clothing items and so forth because of what New Orleans had gone through.
right,
So we understood what Houston was going through, and it was really great to see that city picking up and saying we need to help Houston the way we were helped when we were hit by Hurricane Katrina.
yeah, that's
That's
true
exactly
because
right.
because
Yeah.
when that happened, there were thousands of people who came to Houston, and a lot of churches were opened their buildings as shelters, and it was, and a lot of them never left. They basically just relocated to Houston once they
Well,
got
a
here.
lot of my family had evacuated to Houston during Katrina, and I
Okay.
nothing but good things to say. People in Houston and all around the area. Even like Katy and Woodlands were like helping my family out in various ways, and so I have great appreciation for that period.
Right. It was a traumatic thing. So, from your book, The American Daughters, tell us uh, something that you want the readers to know about in terms of the plot line. That I don't want you to do any spoilers, but you know, some different angles. When you write a book, is not necessarily linear in terms of the
Right.
writing the story. There are different arcs and uh,
Hmm.
different things in there. So just give us a little more about what the book is about, and how how difficult was it for you to sell this concept to a publisher?
Yeah. Well, a couple of
Or
brief
easy?
things.
It could have been easy. So I shouldn't say assume it's difficult.
A couple of things on that point. First of all, I think many people out there have probably seen movies like 12 Years a Slave, and many people have, read books. And there's almost a cliche now where if you have people who look like us during that time period, they're almost always on plantations. And as a New Orleans person, I knew and I did research on it that half of the Black people in New Orleans in 1850 were free. And so I wanted to have a chance to bring that out because I had found some research, for example, that some of the richest people in the city were these Creole Black women who, for decades have been owning businesses And there was one lady who was so rich, she had built her own school because it was illegal for the state to fund public schools for Black people. So this book has a lot of free Black folks of color
Okay.
who've been educated, who have their own businesses. One of the characters, she had traveled to Europe, and this happened in real life as well. And so I want to show something that I've never seen depicted in a book or in a film, for example. And then, beyond that, a lot of the book is about, again, these sort of connections. Audie's the main character, and pretty early on, she meets this young lady named Lenore. They become best friends. And I thought about how in a lot of those books and movies I've talked about, you rarely see Black women and girls just having the conversation. Like there's somewhere being hit by something bad is happening to them, but it's like just let them just talk for a minute. So I have many moments like that in the book. In terms of selling it, I have been with the same publisher now since my first book. This is my third book. It's One World Random House in New York. My editor is Nicole Counts, and we have a good relationship. And so once I had the drafts pretty tight, and I went through my agent and presented it to her, she was on board immediately and helped me finish it up. And it was a smooth process. Now, earlier, when I was getting started with my first book, it took longer to find a publisher. But in recent years, I've been on a pretty smooth track.
I
Yeah,
will
well,
say that I'm very glad that you made the point about free people of color in New Orleans. A little known fact, and like you said, people the popular narrative is that everywhere in the South, every Black person was enslaved. But a little known fact is that New Orleans had the highest number of free people of color.
That's right.
And just as you said, they owned businesses, they owned land, they were living their lives. So I mean, it's good to be able to make that point.
Yes. Thank you.
now have either of you all seen the movie? I was just sitting here thinking, trying to remember the name of it because I knew the storyline. It's an old film. It stars Sidney Poitier as a young actor and Clark Gable. And it was called Band of Angels. And the whole movie was set in New Orleans. And Sidney Poitier was free. And there was a couple of Black women in there that were free too. I think Clark Gable owned, like, it wasn't a plantation though. It's more like in the quarter. But the women were all free and bossing people around, in charge. So if you haven't seen that movie, it's a classic film. It's streaming somewhere, I'm sure. It's called Band of Angels. It's really
I've
good.
never seen it, but I'm gonna look for it now that you've mentioned it.
Yeah, Sidney Poitier.
I'm going to check it out.
It's very good. Some of those old movies were really groundbreaking in terms of roles that Black people played. A lot of them were stereotyped, but then there were others that allowed for, and Sidney Poitier was at the forefront of a lot of that.
That's right. That's right.
As an actor, he was in a lot of movies where he didn't play the stereotypical role. So, I did want to find out some of your other work. You said you had 3 books, and
That's
you showed
right.
us the first book. What was the second book?
So it's over here somewhere.
And are they connected? Or are they completely separate?
Let's see. I may have put it away, but oh wait, there it is. Yeah. My second book is a collection of short stories, and it's called The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You. It's
Okay.
19 short stories. Almost all the characters in the stories are Black, and my idea behind that collection was, oftentimes if you ask people who are the New Orleans writers, they will like name people who are not natives, probably not Black, and maybe they had lived in the city for a period of time, but they're not. So, like, for example, William Faulkner often gets named, or Tennessee Williams gets named often. But there was
That's
some
a
other
whole
places.
festival named after him in New Orleans.
It is true. It was true. I went to the festival a couple of weeks ago, and it's I mean, you think he was like a native guy, basically. And so one of my missions as a writer from the city of New Orleans is I want to see my community. I want to see my family and my friends and people I work with in stories. And so I tried to, in the 19 stories in the collection, have a wide variety of characters. So from like a young man living on the street to you know, a lady who owns her own company, to another guy who's a lawyer and he's married and they're having adventures in the French Quarter. There's a great variety of like characters and tones. Some stories are very dark and serious. Some stories are very humorous and strange. And the hope being that it inspires other writers who are local from the community to write their own stories and to, you know, be willing to put their stories out there into the world.
Hmm.
Awesome. And I'm really glad you said that because, you know, being an author from New Orleans, I remember when I first came back home after publishing my first book years ago, I would run into people who would say, well, you're going to sell your book in other cities because people in New Orleans don't read, or
Mm,
you know, we're in the bottoms, you know, we don't read here. And this is people saying this, not about other people. They're including themselves in that
right.
we don't read, we don't write. And I'm just so glad that since that, I guess I never noticed it prior to then, but since that moment, I've seen people changing that narrative, and the the written word is becoming more popular. It's actually becoming booming now, with more people, with more authors in the area, with more book clubs in the area, more readers in the area, and we're quickly changing that narrative. So I'm really glad that you said what you said because it shows that we are changing that narrative.
Yeah, it is changing. You know, we've always been a storytelling community, especially through our music. But, you know, I want to give a shout out to two Black bookstores in the city. There's Community Book Center. They've been around for a long time. Those ladies have been, you know, putting out knowledge and literature into the community for a long time. There's also a newer bookstore that opened about 3 years ago called Baldwin and Company. And they're fantastic. Baldwin and Company, it's a bookstore, it's a coffee shop. They have the biggest readings I've ever seen. Like they'll bring in, you know, national celebrities, like, you know, sports people like uh Asia Wilson and, you know, Stephen Smith and those kind of people. But also local authors as well. I mean, I was there last Saturday and they had a reading of children's books for local children, and it's a literacy program and a financial literacy program. So Baldwin is doing great things as well. I love all of them so much.
Hmm. Are you familiar with that with them, Rhonda?
I'm familiar with both of the bookstores, and just as he said, Community Book Center has been around for a very long time. They're like a staple of the community. People come there just to gather.
Okay.
You know, they call them Mama Vera and Mama
That's right.
John.
That's right.
So it's a bookstore that's very supportive of the community, and they're in what's called the Bayou Road corridor. So
Mhm.
they're on this street where almost all of the businesses on that one couple of blocks are all Black owned. So there are people who come to that area just to go in and out of the shops and just to talk to the restaurants and shopkeepers. It's a great area.
It really is. It's a beautiful area.
Mhm.
Hmm. Now I wanted to ask you about because we only have a couple minutes left about your short story writing.
Mhm.
What makes for a good short story? I'm not a short story reader or writer. I'm a writer, but I'm not. Have I ever written a short story? I don't think so. But you know, I wrote a lot of commentary, like op-eds, for a long time. But op-eds are a lot shorter than a short story. So, how many words are in a typical? Is there a typical short story length?
Oh,
How do
sure.
you decide uh how to create the dynamic where you can tell a whole story in a few words?
Yeah. I mean, I teach in several programs. My main job is at LSU as a creative writing professor. Um, I
Okay.
think that the vague rule for short stories is you could read it in one sitting. Now, some people read faster than others. Maybe on average, page wise, short stories are between maybe 6 and 20 pages, give or take. They can be shorter or longer. Um, but for me, what makes a short story is usually it's about one thing and it's very tight. And so if I tell you the story, you could almost like recite all the major plot points back and give somebody the sort of the feeling and the vibe of, you know, how it hits, that kind of thing. Versus with a novel, it can be, you know, it could be hundreds of pages and it could, you know, it can go on for, you know, a century and it can make all those different moves and people just kind of like chatting and just kind of like hanging out. So short stories are always tight, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Okay.
I love a good short story where once you've reached the end, you still feel like you've read a full story. You
Yes,
don't feel like
absolutely.
anything's been left out. So that's what I like
Absolutely.
about short stories. It really kind of helps us to exercise our chops, so to speak, as writers.
Yeah, it's one of my goals. I want you to feel like you're satisfied when you put it down.
Yes.
Okay, well, I might have to get a copy of your book, as um some of our readers said. Somebody, Curtis Stevenson, who watches the show every week or almost every week, said he was looking forward to picking up both of the books. Um, both American Daughters books. And then oh, and Tony Benita said another book to purchase. Yeah, that's the thing about our show is we've been almost 4 years uh, and missing hardly any Tuesdays.
Mm,
So and we've interviewed over 600 people during that
wow.
amount of time. So it's a lot of books. And not every guest is an author. Tonight, all the guests are authors, but we have bookstores on and book clubs and all kinds of people doing book things that aren't necessarily authors. So we need to have at least one of the bookstores from New Orleans. We haven't had them on the show, so we need to get them on.
Yeah, get Mama Vera and DJ from Baldwin on here. They would love to talk to you. And I just want to say I appreciate y'all and all the work that you're doing, spreading literature in the written word to people. Is really important that this be done.
Well, what we hope we add to the book sales of the authors who on, and also just the exposure to African American literature, that a lot of people don't realize how many people are writing books. There's lots and lots of Black people writing all kinds of books. And it's not just only one narrow genre, or it's not only urban. It's not only street books. Even within a genre, there's lots and lots of different books. For example, these two books are both historical fiction, but they're completely different.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they have the same title almost, but they're
That's right.
totally different stories.
That's right.
So there's lots and lots of writing being done, and lots of good writing. I mean, solid storytelling. We're not where we were 100 years ago, where there were only a few people who wrote and released books, and it was a limited amount of things to choose from. Now, the challenge is, on the budget that you have to pick, because you can't buy every book. So, but that's an abundance of riches, so to speak.
Well, also a shout out to the libraries that do an important job, allowing us to get access to more books than we could otherwise get our hands on.
Absolutely.
Right. So how's the book doing overall? Have you gotten some feedback?
The book, I feel blessed and highly favored. The book is my first national bestseller, and
Oh,
I go to.
congratulations.
Thank you. I've been on book tour in the airports. I've seen it in the airports in Atlanta. I think in Houston. I think in DC as well. So it's right there on the shelves, and it's being sold, and people seem to like it.
Well, that's good. Congratulations. And we were trying to get you on a month ago, and you were so busy. So I'm glad that you were able to put us on your schedule and tell us about your story. And I hope people go out and buy the book.
Well, I appreciate you very much. It is quite an accomplishment to have done 600 interviews in less than 4 years. That is amazing. Keep going.
Well, we plan to. So, yeah,
Well, thank you for
it
your
seems
support as
daunting a
well.
little bit, but we enjoy it. We love doing it, and we're committed. So anyway, you have a great evening, Maurice. Thank you again for being a guest on the show, and continued success
Thank you
with
so much.
the American Daughters and your backlist too.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you. Well, y'all have a great night. Thank you so much for this.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
take
you.
care. Bye-bye.